In the last video, I had claimed that Resident Evil Code Veronica was an entry in the series that was mixed in reception. One trip to the comment section later and I learned that I was greatly off base. I don't know, I just felt like this was a game that YouTubers at least don't seem to think much of when talking about the best the series has to offer. My mistake for treating that like an appropriate sample size. Lots of people love this game, and the critics felt that way when the game first released. Code Veronica debuted in the Sega Dreamcast in early 2000, just a few months after the release of Resident Evil 3 on PlayStation. If you've been following these videos so far, you know that RE1 dropped on the Sega Saturn in 1997, but in the process of making a port for RE2 on that console, they quickly realized it wasn't working and that it wasn't worth doing since the Saturn was basically dead in the West by 1998. So they got to work on making a new Resident Evil title that would be exclusive to Sega's next console, the Dreamcast. Like I was saying last week, Capcom clearly had a lot of faith in Resident Evil as a series by this point with 2 hit games under its belt. So numerous games were in development at this time, a side game being expanded into the full RE3 like I explained in the previous video, with the Sega project coming to fruition as Resident Evil Code Veronica. When it was released, Code Veronica sold less than the PS1 trilogy did, despite being one of the best-selling games on the console. However, that was to be expected given the fact that the PlayStation was a commercial juggernaut, and the Dreamcast, like the Saturn before it, was clearly not going anywhere good by 2000. Especially with the PS2 on the way to put the last nail in Sega's console coffin. What Code Veronica was met with was glowing praise from the critics, especially in regards to its visual presentation, demonstrating just how much the Dreamcast was capable of compared to the previous gen tech. This positive reception remained consistent when the game was re-released on the PlayStation 2 in 2001 as Resident Evil Code Veronica X, but got more mixed reviews when Code Veronica X then released on the GameCube in 2003, and much more negative when the game was remastered on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2011. Needless to say, my claim that this was a mixed reception entry was a vast oversimplification of the matter. Regardless of all that, I went into this with an open mind. The whole point of this retrospective is my finally playing these games that I've always wanted to get into for a long time now, but just never had the time, despite loving the output I had gotten the chance to play. So it doesn't really matter what I thought people thought of each game, you know? I'm just here to say what I thought. I wanted to like Code Veronica since I really dug the PS1 trilogy, but you've read the title of the video. I didn't really like Code Veronica, and that makes me very sad to say. I don't think Code Veronica is some pile of crap, I just didn't have that much fun playing it either. And that's the thing that makes me sad about it. So many evidently enjoy it, and I wanted to be one of those people, but I just wasn't. It doesn't bring me joy to say this about Code Veronica either. When it comes to negative reviews, a game has to really be an E-tier experience for me to want to rip into it. These days, I try to make more of a comedy theater out of it, like in the new X7 video from a couple weeks back. Code Veronica isn't that kind of game, I just played it 1.5 times and just didn't like it that much, which I guess warrants the conversation of how I played it. For my first run of Code Veronica, I just played it on the Dreamcast. For my second run, I played Code Veronica X on the PlayStation 2. As mentioned before, it was also on the GameCube, but even had higher quality textures compared to the PS2 release, as you might expect. Code Veronica X adds a few extra cutscenes that makes the story feel more fleshed out, something we can talk about more later, and makes some graphical changes like Steve's hair, but otherwise is basically the same game as it was on the Dreamcast. The PlayStation 2 version added motion blur to the game, a possible way to obscure the game's 480i resolution, not sure. The HD edition of CVX was a weird one though. First, I think it looks atrocious. I'm not usually the kind of person who finds a remaster the best version of a game, and CVX is a casual example of why. It utilizes entirely different lighting from the Dreamcast version, and so the whole game just looks really oversaturated, and I find that incredibly distracting. Especially when the pre-rendered cutscenes still look like the original game because they're pre-rendered. It's not broken or anything like a really bad remaster would be, however I just find the phenomenon of remasters completely overhauling the visuals of a game into some bloomified, high contrast, or oversaturated mess to be a practice that needs to end. But most remasters don't get much time and budget, so what can you really expect? The other odd thing about CVX HD is that it's not very accessible. If you want to play it, your only options are the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and the Xbox Series consoles. And that's how I played it for the limited amount of playtime I put into it. Capcom remastered all the 2000s RE games on PS3 and 360, but for some reason you can't get CVX on the newer PlayStation consoles or Steam, when you can for the other 6th gen RE remasters. Don't be fooled. The version of CVX on PS4 is an emulation of the PS2 release, not the HD edition before anyone says it. Just an odd thing, not sure why they did it like that. But anyway, even if the visual problem wasn't there, I also hate the button mapping of CVX HD. The Dreamcast version had the bottom face button interact with things and the left one shoot, a reverse of how it was in the PS1 games. Despite the Dreamcast version having different control layouts in the settings, none of them work like the PS1 games, so I just remapped the bindings myself for a more comfortable playthrough. It's weird because RE2 on Dreamcast had fully customizable button mapping, but 3 and Code Veronica didn't. But personally, remapping the buttons was an option I did not have in the HD version, so I'm not playing this version ever again. But we've gotten off track for what the video is actually about. What's not to like about Code Veronica? I mean, it's littered with appeal for fans of the series. Beginning with this action-packed CG cutscene where Claire Redfield tears her way through an Umbrella facility before ultimately being captured and sent to a prison island in the Southern Ocean. Compared to the CG cutscenes in RE2 and 3, this one really catches your attention as it, especially for the standards of its time, looks like the kind of action scene you'd find in a high-budget movie, with significantly higher quality character models than what was on the PlayStation 1. Code Veronica also promised to be a story fans of the series wouldn't want to miss out on, the game being about the continued adventures of Claire Redfield following her journey to find Chris in Raccoon City from RE2, and also taking place after the destruction of Raccoon City from RE3. This game also promises the return of Chris Redfield to the story for the first time since RE1, which came out 4 years earlier at this point, which I can imagine must have been pretty exciting for fans who had been there since day one. On a technical level, the game was also pretty exciting back in the day. For the in-game scenes, the models actually move around and emote in ways they couldn't on PlayStation 1, including lips that move and animations that go beyond reusing the animations from gameplay. The areas are also fully modeled in 3D as opposed to the pre-rendered images used in the older games. Although while we're talking about that, I should mention that there are some drawbacks to the new hardware. It's not all next-gen appeal in this one. While having 3D modeled backgrounds is nice, it does lead to a significant decrease in the detail each area has compared to the PS1 games. By RE3, areas will be pretty rich in terms of detail, but locations in Code Veronica are largely flat and very foggy to compensate for its shortcomings. Maybe that was what the HD version was trying to correct, but the colors aren't the problem, it's just the details in the walls are lacking for a majority of the areas. The frame rate has been lowered from 60 to 30 as well. This one doesn't present a big problem, I just figured I'd mention it. What does bother me though are the much longer loading screens. I always hated these door transition load screens in the RE games, and Code Veronica has what felt like the longest ones yet, especially when they zoom in on the door and then cut to an opening animation. That reduced loading is probably the best part about the game in the HD version. And hey, if it was on PC, we could just mod out the door screens entirely. But finally, we have all that preamble out of the way. What did I not like about Code Veronica? Really, you can narrow it down to a couple of basic things that just hurt the entire experience. One of the strongest things about the classic Resident Evil series is how it goes about its exploration. In RE1, 2, 3, as well as the other games I've played, I was endlessly captivated by the simple exploration design. You would land in an area, find places you could and could not go to, find an item in a place you could go, and use it to gain access to a place you couldn't before, and then keep that structure going for a few more hours until the game is done. Code Veronica has this, but the way it works is just very unappealing. The previous games were all divided into different segments, which I outlined in the RE3 video. Sometimes these games will put all the attention into one of these areas at the expense of the others, but that's besides the point. You start Code Veronica on Rockford Island as Claire must escape the prison. From there, you gain access to the Ashford Palace, the training grounds, the airport, and the private residence in relatively quick succession. Similar to RE3, many of these areas aren't that big on their own, but getting access to them at roughly the same time leads to a very confusing first playthrough. I recall several moments where I did not know how to progress. Like how this door to the private residence is blocked by a gun-shaped key. You find the guns, but it activates a trap, so you have to put them back where you found them to escape. You need to grab this wheel from that very room in order to trigger a cutscene where Steve, a guy Claire met, gets caught in the gun trap you dodged earlier, and then you save him. Steve won't give Claire the guns and says he'll only do so if you trade him with something fully automatic. Well, you then take the wheel down to this port where you reach the airport, thinking you're making progress, and after running around here for several minutes, you realize that nothing tied to current progression was here except the biohazard key you need, because after this you need to go to the training grounds. Explore it thoroughly to reach this sequence where Claire and Steve finally make the gun trade, and you can now bring it back to the palace so you can use them to get inside the private residence, where you spend a few minutes to grab the silver key, which is used inside the palace to unlock a door that hides an eagle crest that you have to use all the way back at the beginning of the game in the prison yard to grab another key item that's needed in the palace to further progress in the private residence so you can get one of the 3 items needed to escape via the airport. I feel like the convoluted nature of this should really speak for itself. In principle, this is the same kind of design as the previous games, but with items from one area being needed in another, it creates a first playthrough that, like I said, gets really confusing. I have no problem saying I peeked at a guide in order to get through Code Veronica, because after a bit, running back and forth like an idiot starts to lose the very limited appeal it already had before. When I got through RE2 and 3 mostly on intuition, but back to Code Veronica, that's the main problem. The fact that multiple levels are open at once, it just made the game feel too big in a way. Maybe this would happen in, say, RE1, but the mansion was a fairly confined space, and so exploring it only gave you so many options to exhaust, when here it was much more open-ended, which I didn't like. Even on my second go with the game, this still presented a problem because now you need to commute from area to area. Finding the medicine bottle isn't a relieving moment, it's cause for a sigh as you have to run back to the room you literally started the game in, and that kind of backtracking just kills the pace. Backtracking is a massive game-wide problem. Right at the end of the game, I knew I needed to get the 2 jewels from this tiger statue, but moving one of them caused it to turn to that side. What you need to do is run back 3 rooms to kill the power to the area, and then the statue won't be able to move. But in my infinite luck, I didn't put the jewel back in its place, so it was still facing the side. So I had to run back to where I left the jewel and put it back in its place, run back to turn the power back on to reset the statue, then turn it back off to stop its ability to move. Then run back to grab both jewels, and then I could progress. The game was just littered with remarkably tedious busywork. Like how you can't just escape from the airport, Claire needs to get out, hit the switch which obscures your path back, making you take a detour that takes you through 2 different areas yet again just to make it back to the plane. This isn't difficult to me, it's just really monotonous. Although if you want to talk about frustration, let me tell you, Code Veronica is defined by the "what an idiot I am for my inability to predict that" principle. I'm coining that now. No greater example than halfway through the game where the perspective switches from Claire to Chris Redfield. So here I am as Claire, exhausting all my ammo on the boss against Nosferatu in the snow, and suddenly I'm Chris. This isn't a massive problem inherently, as previous games saw you switching characters, but to directly compare to the part in RE3 where you played as Carlos, RE3 did not share resources between Jill and Carlos. The developers designed the hospital segment around Carlos's limited resources. The very first thing that happens when you play as Chris is a boss fight against a giant worm. Before this, you find out that Chris and Claire can share items via the item box. If you want to, you can, as Claire, leave behind powerful items and weapons that Chris will then be able to use. For example, the worm boss literally gives you ammo for the bowgun, something I found as Claire way earlier. But my problem is, this comes with no warning whatsoever. I was just barely surviving as Claire using all my most powerful stuff against the enemies I was facing, like how I kept shooting these bug enemies with the assault rifle because I didn't know these enemies broke the series rule of enemies staying dead once defeated. So that was a bunch of ammo wasted. But then, like I said, I used all I had left in this boss fight, and then I'm Chris. And then I'm bumbling around this worm boss fight with nothing but a basic handgun because the game did not warn me of this. And they actually could have, too. You play as Steve for a brief bit in the first half of the game, and maybe this could have been a good way to introduce the idea that the player can trade items between characters, and that it would be important to manage your items with that expectation. At the end of the game, you switch back to Claire, and I decided to bring powerful weapons with me, assuming this was the big chunk of gameplay, but instead, you only play as Claire for like 5 more minutes, and you don't even need ammo. All you need is health to survive this chase scene, and then she's done for the rest of the game, leaving Chris with whatever you had from before to beat the final boss. And apparently, if your resource management was bad enough, you could even get into a situation where beating the final boss will be almost undoable unless you have a save file that goes back far enough to change that, which luckily didn't happen to me. You could say poor resource management in an RE game should be punished, but not to this extent. This does not sit right with me because the problem comes from the "what an idiot I am" principle, which is just not fair. Playing Code Veronica a second time is like playing a completely different game. It goes by so much faster when you know what you're doing. Even then, I wasn't perfect, but it took me 3 hours to reach Chris's first segment when it took me almost 7 hours the first time, and then it took almost 12 hours to beat the game entirely. This was nothing like RE3, where I could tell I was just bad at the game and needed to play it a second time to get a better grasp of it. And since publishing my video on RE3, I've learned even more about RE3, like the fact that a separate button targets objects instead of enemies, completely fixing my issue with the final boss, and allowing me to understand why I could barely hit explosive barrels, among other in-depth features RE3 has, which Code Veronica mostly doesn't. In this game, the issue was entirely progression and items. On my second playthrough, I was hoarding health like it was nobody's business, and I had a surplus of it to go around. The same goes for ammo. The first time, I had to knife only this boss fight on the plane because I just happened to be out of ammo completely. The second run will alleviate issues with progression and items, but on the whole, I just felt like this game dragged on for what felt like an eternity. Like the part where Chris and Claire are finally reunited and it turns out that Claire is poisoned from the boss fight I last played as her during, since I guess I was too dumb to think of healing her from that. So what does Chris have to do? He must run back the way you came to find a cure and bring it back to Claire, and then you can progress, but then they get separated and that begins the really brief final Claire segment. When this happened, I was just thinking, of course I have to go back the way I came, why wouldn't I? The game has just had an obsession with that since the very beginning. No amount of playthroughs is going to make running around these areas over and over fun for me. I just thought this game was supremely boring, and by the time I was halfway through, I was getting the sense that I really didn't want to play anymore. But on my second playthrough, I knew for a fact that I was not enjoying this game. That's why I didn't finish the second run as well. I played up to the first Chris segment because I wanted to see a few things. Does the game get faster on a second playthrough due to knowledge of what's coming, and is it more fun? The answer is yes to the first one and no to the second one, so I just dropped it when I got killed like 20 minutes into Chris's segment and had to start over. And that's a sad fact. Everything else I could add on Code Veronica just comes back to the central point. I didn't enjoy the game. There were numerous thoughts I had while playing it, like, man, it's cool how you can target multiple enemies at once with two-handed weapons like I'm Dante in Devil May Cry. Or generally speaking, the weapon selection was pretty good in this game. Claire's bowgun in RE2 fired 3 darts at once, meaning every shot will spend 3 arrows, and Code Veronica improves it to where it fires 1 at a time but still has a boatload of ammo, so that was the go-to weapon for much of the game. Claire can mod her handgun to be like Leon's in RE2, firing 3 shots at once. The grenade launcher returns with the power it had in RE2, the shotgun is as useful as ever. Across the board, I just found the weapons very useful, even the knife with its multi-frame damage output, when it was basically useless in all the previous games. I thought it was a cool detail how the game has bats for enemies, and if you equip your lighter, they'll leave you alone. I'm glad that the quick turn from RE3 came back in this game, becoming a mainstay in the controls. I was surprised at how much I didn't like stairs returning to how they were in RE1 and 2. I complimented RE3 for having stairs you naturally interacted with. I thought I was just complimenting a relatively small addition, but returning to a game where you have to give up control for several seconds just to go up and down stairs went to show how much RE3 improved it. I think the game has a pretty creepy vibe throughout, like watching a video of the Ashford twins taking the wings off of a live dragonfly and feeding it to a mound of ants. That was pretty messed up. But again, I don't like playing Code Veronica. It's the kind of game where all I can think about is how much I'd rather be playing some other game with my time, and that overshadows everything in this game. That even includes the plot. In a vacuum, I like the story of Code Veronica, although the game is working overtime to make sure I don't care. I mean, this game has some of the worst vocal performance in the series, second only to RE1. In this game's case, it's not like the actors sound as though they're coming from another planet like that game. It's just more that the delivery of the lines from Steve and Alfred Ashford are just so terrible. I do like how Alison Court still voices Claire in this game. She's the only RE actor from the 90s that continued to play her character for a decent bit after her debut in RE2. Similar to RE1, I don't mind looking past the presentation of the story to enjoy what's there though. I thought it was really cool to see Claire be this action hero type. Not the first thing I'd think of when making a game starring Claire following RE2, but I thought it made for entertaining cutscenes and dialogue with her. The main thing dragging Claire's portion of the story down is her interaction with Steve. Even looking past this lad's voice acting, the writers just make him incredibly annoying. I mean, him not giving you the guns right when he finds them is why you have to spend an extra hour looking for guns to trade with. He's not totally useless, like when he saves Claire from this one monster with the guns he won't give up, but there are more examples of him getting in the way than helping. I mean, you literally have to bumble around trying to shut off toxic gas for 20 minutes in a later area specifically because he was operating a crane and just couldn't stop looking at Claire's body and then accidentally rammed the crane into a pipe. It seems the YouTube comments love talking about this ludonarrative synchronicity thing, and this being Exhibit A. Thanks to Steve's negligence, I have to backtrack through more rooms, really tying the story and gameplay together. But in all seriousness, I did think that the story has cool moments and surprises, like how Chris comes to the island to save Claire, and that's when he learns that Albert Wesker is still alive after the tyrant seemingly killed him in RE1. But then Wesker just busts out full-on superpowers. Admittedly, Wesker kinda comes out of nowhere in the original Code Veronica, but Code Veronica X adds a cutscene where Claire meets Wesker earlier on, who mentions that he attacked the island and that caused the T-virus to leak across the island, giving his role in the story a little more context, and also building up to his first scene with Chris, because his scene with Claire first shows off that the man now has superhuman powers and a real burning hatred for Chris Redfield following the events of RE1. Speaking of previous events, Code Veronica X had been released alongside a DVD called Wesker's Report, which I watched on YouTube courtesy of a YouTuber called BlackFox2240 who uploaded the whole thing. This mini-movie is narrated by Albert Wesker as he describes in detail the events of the PS1 trilogy, giving you insight you wouldn't have known before, like how Wesker faked his own death by taking a mutated strain of the T-virus to give himself superpowers and to temporarily make it look like he was dead. That's how he came back, and explains why he never died in the first place. He wanted to set Chris and Jill up to face the Tyrant at the mansion in RE1 so he could collect that combat data and sell the Tyrant to a competing company of umbrellas, whom he was working with before, even being in close contact with William Birkin, the developer of the G-Virus from RE2. Wesker explains that since he faked his own death, he had to operate from the shadows during the fall of Raccoon City, harboring a grudge against all the remaining STARS members as they foiled his plans in RE1. As he collected combat data on Nemesis when it went after Jill in RE3, and was the one who hired Ada to get the G-Virus in RE2. It also mentioned that he was the one who saved her life in the end. Some of the things mentioned in Wesker's report don't add up with where the series stands now. I mean, Wesker talks about Ada's death from the Leon A version of RE2, and the film shows footage of Claire's B ending, but by now it's established that Claire A, Leon B is the canon version of RE2. And Wesker also claims that following RE2, Leon went to work with an anti-Umbrella organization while Claire went to find Chris, beginning the events of Code Veronica, leaving Sherry to be captured by Wesker. But this was seemingly based off of an earlier version of RE4's story that was scrapped. So some details are off, but overall I thought it was fascinating to see them connect the series' story like this. Shows there was an effort to take the lore and characters they were building seriously. Wesker's report was external from Code Veronica, but even in the game, I'd say there's a lot of interesting lore to learn about. RE1 had laid the groundwork for the series' story, teaching us about Umbrella, their experiments, and their unethical practices. RE2 teaches the player about how corrupt Umbrella is, controlling every major part of Raccoon City, and then RE3 showing the devastating consequences of Umbrella's actions. Code Veronica gives more backstory to Umbrella as a company with the introduction of the Ashford family. Dr. Edward Ashford helped Oswald Spencer establish Umbrella Pharmaceuticals, but with Edward's son not being a specialist in virology, there was a fear that Spencer would take over full control of Umbrella, so he created a genetic clone of Veronica Ashford where the lineage started to maintain that presence. An accident results in a boy being born as well as a girl, with the two of them being the main antagonists Chris and Claire have to tangle with in the present day. Their creator being turned into a monster you have to face off against as well. So like I said, I think this story has a lot of interesting elements and backstory, and that build-up could have led to an exciting climax, which was certainly what the game was going for as you run around an area modeled after the Spencer Mansion's main hall from RE1. That was a cool bit of fan service. Steve gets turned into a monster and dies saving Claire. That was definitely supposed to be a good moment, even if most of the audience doesn't care about this guy by this point in the story. You see a cutscene with a super-powered Wesker getting beat by Alexia, which makes you really wonder how you're gonna beat her as a normal human, making the final blow from the linear launcher gun really satisfying as Chris and Claire escape the exploding base. But, you know, despite being able to appreciate all the stuff Code Veronica added to the story, it all comes back to the same thing I was saying a few minutes ago. Regardless of the things that I liked or didn't like about Code Veronica and the moment-to-moment gameplay, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, my overall impression was just that I didn't like the game for all the reasons stated towards the middle of the video. Code Veronica, through its large levels and noob traps, just left me feeling bored, which is probably the worst thing I can say about a game designed for replayability like RE. As stated at the top of the video, this isn't something that brings me great joy to say either. Code Veronica is not some rushed, unfinished mess, it's just a game I didn't like in a series I've really enjoyed thus far, when I went into it hoping for the best. But it just didn't happen this time, and that's fine. If you like it, I implore you to not only keep feeling that way, but to share why in the comments section. But for myself, I probably won't be revisiting this one anytime soon. The remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 got a lot of flack for the removal of content that made the original game so unique, and I completely get that. This is the kind of game, though, where I'd be very curious to see how a reimagining would play out, because structurally, I don't think Code Veronica is that fun, so a new take would definitely be something I'm interested in seeing. However, with Capcom seemingly going all in on remaking Resident Evil 4, one of the best games ever made, good luck with that, it seems like Code Veronica is going to get left in the dust barrel, which is a shame. Thankfully, the fans seem to agree with me on that, which is why a fan remake of Code Veronica has been in development for a while now, taking inspiration from RE2 make and RE3 make in some respects. And it's seemingly getting released this year. I'm definitely looking forward to this project and might do a video on it when it drops. Who knows? I'll leave a link to their Twitter in the description for anyone who wants to check it out themselves. But to close this video, I'll just say this. In 2022, I plan on covering Resident Evil Remake, Resident Evil 0, and Resident Evil 4, but it will be in a few months. I was always planning on these three being closer to the holiday season when the first 4 videos would be done in the spring, but little did I know how much energy these videos would take out of me to do. So it's definitely something I think needs to be done. However, I'm looking forward to doing more RE videos, so I hope you're looking forward to my coverage of those games that will come, like I said, later this year. In the meantime, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.